How's everyone doing?
We're doing good. We're just kind of, people are trickling in, we're waiting. So I thought maybe I could introduce you to the host of tonight's event, Ivanik, if you wanted to say hi.
Yeah, so hi, Husoni. Welcome to AU Black History Month. It's really, really nice to have you, and we look forward to what you have to say today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. It's always a pleasure meeting new people and having the platform and the opportunity to talk about my experiences and my thoughts. I hope that folks will come here with an open mind and also with questions. If any of you have questions throughout this, what I have to say, please feel free to post them in the chat or ask me directly at any point. Sorry if I'm really getting into this, but I want this to be more of a conversation. I feel like a lot of times you go and you speak and it's just you listening to yourself for a half an hour or 40 minutes. So please feel free to have a conversation, interrupt and question. And yeah, I feel like that's will be the most effective way to learn and connect with each other.
Great, thank you. So we have Natalia, and I'll let everyone introduce themselves to you so you can know them a little bit, you know what I mean?
Sure, I can start, and yeah, definitely, and after introductions, maybe we can begin. My name is Natalia Ivanik, and I'm the Vice President of Community and Wellness here at AUSU. And maybe I will pass it over to Ivanka. You're muted. You're muted.
Oh, hey, sorry. So I was saying, how is everyone doing? Like, how are you guys feeling? I know here in Edmonton, it's a little bit cold. Are you all from Edmonton? Give me the story, share the tea.
I'm in Toronto and it's not that cold, but I don't want to say that because I know Edmonton's really cold today.
I know Jody's from Edmonton, and Husoni, where are you from? Are you from Edmonton or?
So I'm living in Toronto right now. I actually just moved here a couple months ago, but I'm from Jamaica. I lived in New Brunswick for 6 years, and yeah, just moved to Toronto a few months ago for school.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I think everyone is here. Should we start now, or you, Natalia, what's? Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. Welcome to, I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Black History Month at AU Alberta, Athabasca University Student Union. My name is Vivanga Pikashamana. I'm in my final year of political science. Yeah, so I'm also a student at large here at Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So I would like to respect and acknowledge that Athabasca University Student Union is located on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of Nhia, which is Plain Cree, Woodland Cree, Beaver Cree, Dane, and Saulteaux, Mississippi, Métis, and Nakota Sioux people. We also recognize that AUSU members span across the lands we now know as Canada and abroad. And we acknowledge and celebrate these indigenous histories, languages, and culture. So today is February, of course, it's Black History Month, but I would like to just to pause a little bit and to reflect on the contribution Black people have made across the world. Today, many Black people are stepping up to the plate. We have politicians, we have lawyers and doctors really stepping up to the plate, becoming or changing the world for a better place for everyone. In the same manner, I also want to pause and just to reflect that many Black people are also facing inequalities, barriers, home ownership, it's it's kind of disturbing. It's really, really emotional when I think about this. Sometimes the justice system, sometimes it's not a friend to Black people. And I really hope today we take just a moment to reflect and to see what can we do to make the world a better place for everyone. And a little bit about Husoni is that Husoni is a graduate of St. Thomas University in New Brunswick. There he was an influential starting the conversation about anti-Black racism within the university and the broader community. He served on student union for 4 years. Notably, he was elected as the first Black student union president in his university history. He received the University Multicultural Council Champion of Cultural Diversity Award in 2019, and he was also recognized as a top graduating student in 2020, and his community contribution as well. After graduation, Husoni worked for the University Multicultural Council as a member of the Anti-Racism Initiative and was a co-founder of Black Lives Matter Fredericton. He led and contributed to numerous grassroots anti-racism and anti-oppression human rights initiatives throughout these positions. Notably, he led advocacy for Black history to be incorporated in the university public school curriculum and research on racism at that respectful university. Husoni is now pursuing his Juris Doctor degree at Osgoode Hall Law School I think that's in Toronto. However, he remains an active member of Black Lives Fredericton and Black Lives Matter of Canada. Well, what an introduction. What an introduction. I have no words. I'm running out of words. I'm trying to pronounce all these words. Like, you have a very, very intense background. So thank you so much for being here, and please take it away by all means.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us here. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Every time I have the opportunity to share my voice and my perspective, I'm grateful for that. So as you mentioned, my name is Husoni Raymond. I was born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, in a predominantly Black environment. And then I moved to Canada for university. I went to St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And now I am there. I was on the student union. I started Black History Month planning events, which I'll go into later, founded the Black Students Association. And after graduation, I started to be involved in the wider community through Black Lives Matter Fredericton, where we led advocacy for Black history to be included in the public school curriculum and Black history consultations with the government of New Brunswick, established bursaries for Black students at 2 of the publicly funded universities to increase access to post-secondary education, and advocacy, other advocacy initiatives related to reimagining community safety and well-being of racialized people. So before I get into what I'll be necessarily speaking about today, I'm currently in Toronto, or commonly known as Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, including the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and we're covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaty. And I say that because every time I talk about kind of Black history and Black liberation within the Canadian context, it's important to recognize that we do live in a settler colonial state, and there'll be no Black liberation without, Indigenous self-determination. The two are interconnected. And even Black people fighting against anti-Black racism and racism in general must also be fighting for Indigenous self-determination. And that's something at the core of what Black Lives Matter Fredericton tries to do in our advocacy. You know, when I reflect back on kind of the most meaningful moment for me doing organizing and trying to enact change in my community was actually a ceremony that we had with the Black community and the Indigenous community, led by the traditional chief of Woolastook, which is the territory in Fredericton. And it was basically the Indigenous chief, traditional chief and grandmothers, Wabanaki grandmothers doing ceremony and welcoming Black people to their territory. And in turn, we did ceremonies as well. And it was such a joyous moment of uniting again for a common purpose, which is our collective liberation and freedom to self-determine in this kind of settler colonial context. So I say that to say this, that it's not just, you know, saying a territory acknowledgement, but it's building those relationships that we all should strive to do and work together towards a more just and equitable future with the interests of Indigenous peoples in mind. So today I was lucky enough to be given kind of like a free range as to what I would like to speak about. And I think this is kind of a university student and youth leader context. So I will focus my thoughts on that. However, please feel free to ask broader questions related to, I think I'm here to answer anything. I'll share my specific experience and my thoughts, but I'd love if anyone had questions too around community organizing, what my experiences within the broader community, or anti-Black racism in various contexts. I know in the introduction it mentions the overrepresentation of Black people within the criminal justice system. And as someone who studies the law currently, that is of interest to me, you know, discrimination in housing and healthcare, systemic racism in all its forms. So those are topics that I could also try to comment on as well. But first I'll start off by kind of talking about the importance of Black History Month and what it means to me. Then I'll talk about my personal experience with racism on campus and the various ways in which racism might manifest itself, just so people are aware. And then I'll end by talking about allyship and effective allyship and give some kind of tools for allies and what we can do to support each other in this collective struggle. And if there's anything else, any topics that people would like me to touch on, as I said, feel free to drop them in the chat box and I'll incorporate it with whatever else I have to say. I've been to too many of these as both a person who speaks and also a person who listens and participates. And I know how it can be long, and I don't want to be talking for a very long time and boring people with my extensive thoughts, but I'll kind of give that high level overview to keep people engaged and interested. And then probably for 15 or 20 minutes, I'll speak for, because I see that it's already 7:14. And then I'll open it up to questions, and hopefully we'll have some questions that can extend the conversation beyond that. So let me start by what is Black History Month, or what Black History Month means to me. You know, as I mentioned before, I grew up in kind of a predominantly Black country. So we grew up celebrating Black History Month. But to my surprise, when I came to Canada a couple years ago, February passed by, and it dawned on me a couple days ago when I saw an article that I was featured in talking about the lack of recognition for Black History Month, that now, you know, every company everywhere, you know, you can't go through February without someone making a post about Black History Month. And just a change that has happened already. But believe me when I tell you, 5 years ago, There was no recognition for Black History Month on my campus. No one really recognized it in the wider community. And that was really disheartening to me because I felt like I was being erased from the fabric of my campus and my community in general. And I say that because Black people have been in Canada for centuries. You know, Black people have been contributing to Canadian society, but also struggling against settler colonial violence and exploitation and discriminatory laws. So to see kind of the lack of acknowledgement towards that was very disheartening. And also the fact that when I had these conversations with people, people didn't even recognize the fact that slavery existed in Canada. People had no idea that there was slavery and segregation here and Canada's legacy in exploiting Black bodies. So, you know, and I'll talk about what I learned from this situation, but Black History Month is important to me for that reason. It's because it helps not only to highlight kind of the past injustices faced by Black people and the present day barriers, but it also erases, it also combats the stereotypes associated with Black people. You know, going on campus within my first week, someone said to me, "Oh, I was expecting you to be more gangster and taught differently. I was expecting you to be more of a thug." And, you know, this is why Black History Month is important. It's to counteract that narrative that tries to fit all Black people into one mold and kind of tell us who we are. It's always the same narrative of, you know, Black people being unintelligent or a gangster or a thug, and never highlighting the contributions of Black Canadians to the society we have today. So those are high level, some reasons why I think Black History Month is important. And, you know, what I'm going to go into a story about kind of my experience navigating kind of the university landscape and what I ended up doing. So I saw this problem and I decided to do something about it. I decided to say, I think this is unacceptable. And I spoke to my student newspaper and there was an article post about it. And believe me, I got a lot of backlash for it. And then the subsequent year, I decided to take things into my own hands and plan my own events for Black History Month. I wrote funding letters to university departments because I was experiencing racism on campus. It wasn't being acknowledged and my experience was not being validated. So I wanted to bring Black people from across Canada who are experts on race and racism to come and talk about their experiences as well and provide an opportunity for Black people to be heard and for once not kind of minimized or erased on campus. And that event, I ended up, over 300 people ended up participating. And one of the things that kind of I remember from that was after or before the event started, the subsequent year, there was an article that I was featured in, and I talked about the prevalence of stereotypes in New Brunswick and in Canada, and how I even felt that when I went to shop in a store, you know, if I didn't buy anything, I felt over-policed, people would watch me. And then the comments that I received, it was, "Go back home. Why are you here then? It's not as bad as the United States." And I think, again, that stems from the fundamental lack of understanding of Black history and the fact that the same institutions of oppression that are present in the United States were also present and legal in Canada as well. So anyways, that's why it's important to provide these opportunities to speak about Black history and the legacy of kind of marginalizing Black people in Canada and how they manifest themselves in present day barriers. The second thing I want to highlight from this story is that, you know, oftentimes we're confronted with situations of injustice and social inequality. And often it's easy to kind of be a passive bystander. And it's easy to you know, even as racialized people, I'm speaking as racialized people, you know, you don't want to cause problems. You know, Black people are already seen as aggressive and troublemakers. And it's easy to just kind of swallow it and not do anything about it. It's also exhausting for this extra labor to fall in our hands of educating other people, right? But something that I draw inspiration from is that our ancestors who experienced slavery and exploitation were never passive bystanders in their oppression. They were people who fought back. There were people through, you know, different means, of course. Some burnt down the plantations that they were on. Some decided they wouldn't, you know, for instance, Viola Desmond decided that she wouldn't sit in the Black only section of the movie theater in Nova Scotia. You know, the Black people who in Jamaica, the Maroons, who fought for their freedom and escaped the plantation system. So oftentimes I want to speak directly. I see there some, you know, racialized people on here. When we're faced in these situations, I want you to pull on kind of the inspiration of the Black people who have been fighting these institutions of oppression for centuries, and also use our voices and our bodies in the same way to resist the narratives and resist the oppression that we are facing, so that one day when we look in Black history, we'll see that, you know, just as how the people before us fought to bring us where we're at today, I'm sure that in the future, because of our bravery and our ability to speak up against oppression, that we'll look back and say we've made it a far way. What I want to speak to allies about the situation is the importance of showing up. You know, so many people showed up to that event that I put on, but also not being passive bystanders in racism. You know, a lot of people told me when I spoke about my experiences with racism that, oh, they didn't intend to say that. They didn't intend for it to come off that way. They're just ignorant. And no one really validated the impact that had on me. You know, someone told me once that I was working on a paper and I said, I hope I get an A on this paper. And someone told me that, well, just don't write like a Black person, you'll get an A. And when I spoke about this to kind of my white friends, obviously there weren't many Black people on my campus, so I didn't have a lot of racialized friends that could actually relate to my experience. What they told me was that, oh, they're not a bad person, they didn't mean it in that way, but no one acknowledged kind of the hurt that really caused me, essentially saying that in order to be smart, I have to sound white or write white, or implying that Black people are not capable of being their authentic self and also excelling academically. And I don't know how Black people write versus how white people write, because we all write the same language. Anyways, the message that I wanted to take away from that is the importance of being allies in, you know, validating, but also standing up and supporting racialized people in their struggle, so that it's not, they feel like it's not them alone. I don't know what the demographic is there like in Calgary or Edmonton, but I know that it would have been nice when I was living in New Brunswick, and I did have some of those friends when I kind of started doing more of these awareness raising events or initiatives, people who did support me. But it would have been nice initially to have, you know, white allies express their support for me and call out racism when they saw it. So I spoke about why Black History Month is important. I kind of gave a synopsis of my experience, you know, fighting for Black History Month to be recognized on my campus. And, you know, 6 years later, speaking about Black History Month in a different context. So now I want to talk about some examples of racism that I encountered on campus. I know I gave 2 examples of kind of interpersonal experiences, you know, from that person telling me to not write like a Black person, someone telling me that they expected me to be more gangster or a thug, to someone straight up coming in my room calling me the N-word, and I told them it was not appropriate, and they continued to do it and said they had a Black friend that said it was okay for them to do it, so they're going to do it. But I want to talk about more structural issues that might also perpetuate racism on campus. And again, I remind you to please feel free to comment or ask questions in the chat. I really appreciate that. So first of all, there are microaggressions. And I'm sure racialized people know what we mean by microaggressions, and other people. It's not just racialized people that experience microaggressions. Women experience microaggressions. You know, queer people experience microaggressions. People with disabilities experience microaggressions, but in this context, for instance, you know, and I kind of understand the curiosity, but, and again, you know, a lot of people say, oh, these things, people didn't intend to do it. But again, it's the impact, you know, for instance, walking through campus and people touching you without your permission, like touching your hair and being like, oh, this is what it feels like. Oh, it's so fuzzy. And, you know, I personally don't, if people are curious, I personally don't mind if they ask, and then I'd be like, maybe. But, you know, I experienced a lot of times where people would just come and like feeling my head as if I'm a pet on campus. It's comments like what people say about Black people, what you hear about Black people in class. And I have a really funny video that I wish I could share, but I don't want to take up time by sharing it, but perhaps I'll sharing it in the chat so everyone can watch and kind of gain an understanding of what microaggressions are. The other issue that I wanted to talk about was the curriculum. I spoke about advocacy that I participated in to have Black history incorporated in the public school curriculum. But in the university context, it's also very whitewashed. You know, as someone who studied the liberal arts, you know, there were a lot of brilliant Black authors who were theorizing, but their voices were never incorporated in the classroom and in the syllabus. And imagine being a racialized person and everything is being taught from solely a Eurocentric perspective. And brilliant Black authors that you know of that talk about how all these topics intersect with race are not being kind of incorporated. You know, all the brilliant minds that you've ever heard of, all the theories you've been taught always seem to come from white men. Also a lack of representation of women and women kind of feminist teachings in academia. But in this context, again, it kind of felt like erasure. It kind of felt that I did not belong, you know, because all these smart people that were considered kind of the best or the smartest in the field of study that I was in were all white. And there was never once one Black author that I could be like, okay, there's someone like me that's in this field and it's being taught in school. So I think another task that universities have is diversifying the curriculum and what they're actually teaching students, not only incorporating kind of a critical race perspective, especially within the liberal arts context, but also making sure that the authors that you're assigning students to read are diverse. And also just a representation of the images, the videos you're showing, you know, and I understand how appealing it is to just, you know, teach the content of people who look like you or traditionally dominated the field. But think about the impact that it will have on racialized students kind of feeling erased within the classroom. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is stemming from that is the lack of representation of racialized faculty and support systems for Black students. You know, there was never kind of, throughout my entire unit, in my last year, there was one Black professor, which I'm so glad they hired her and I discovered her. And that really impacted my university career, having someone that looked like me, that actually worked in academia that I could go to and talk to and share my experience with, and someone that could provide guidance and support with. Because, you know, experiencing racism on campus and having no one, like I probably, and me and my other friend that went to university together, we talked about how, you know, experiencing racism and the mental impacts that that has on you, and then going, for instance, to a counselor or talking to a professor about it, and them not being able to understand what you're going through or end up minimizing your experience, can be really daunting. So having, you know, proper support systems for racialized people, you know, racialized counselors that and or counselors in general that are knowledgeable about kind of the impacts on of racism on mental health of racialized students. And I would actually, those lack of supports actually increase the chances of racialized students dropping out of university. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is access. So a lot of universities are predominantly white spaces again, and there's a lack of representation of Black students on our campuses. And I want us to really interrogate why that is a thing, and, you know, not kind of erasing the fact, one, that a lot of universities in Canada actually excluded Black students from attending post-secondary education. When we look at McGill University, when we look at Queen's University's medical school also excluded Black students at one point. And how, you know, that history of exclusion, how that actually impacted, you know, the ability for Black people to move up the social ladder, but also how that manifests itself in present day access barriers. You know, we have a huge, you know, racial income gap in Canada, and access to post-secondary education for racialized students are low because people aren't willing to recognize the fact that racialized students need additional or are more likely to need financial support. So if we want to increase access to post-secondary education and representation within post-secondary institutions, we have to recognize how these systemic and historic barriers actually manifest itself in lack of access to spaces like post-secondary institutions. So I see that I've been talking already for almost 20 minutes, and I haven't even gotten into kind of the allyship component. So I want to pause a little bit to see if there are any questions or comments related to the race and racism Black History Month. And I know that was high level, but time won't permit me to really dissect into it. But if there's anything that's stood out to anyone that they had a question about, I'll be happy to entertain it.
Okay, so I have a question actually. So could you tell us more why February is just like the only month about Black History Month? Like why February? Like if you...
I can't answer that question. I don't know why February was chosen. And ironically, the shortest month of the year. So I don't know if there's a logic behind February being Black History Month. I'll have to look that up. But if you're, I think the real issue is, you know, why there has to be a Black History Month in this context. And my answer to that would be every month should be Black History Month, but particularly because currently there's a lack of knowledge and an erasure of Black history. I think it's pertinent that we set aside space, you know, for Black history, specifically for Black history to be discussed and talked about. But hopefully one day we'll live in a society where Black history is Canadian history and it's completely incorporated in all aspects of what we do. So there'll be no need for, you know, a special month to highlight the contributions of Black people to Canadian society. But in this current context, because of the history of erasure and the fact that you know, the contributions of Black Canadians and Black people generally are not talked about, and the legacy of anti-Black racism against Black people in Canada is not widely known. And it's, you know, I mentioned that I'm working with the government of New Brunswick right now to incorporate Black history within the public school curriculum. So we're just starting to get there where it's a permanent thing. So until, you know, Black history is a part of our collective history, and it's reflected in every aspect in every classroom, then I think there will be a continual need to have a special time and a special place to discuss and highlight Black history. But I don't think it should be the be all end all. It's not just, you know, discuss Black history in February and then close the book. February is a month to highlight Black history, but I think the conversation around Black history and combating racism and making a truly equitable society for everyone is a conversation that should extend far beyond the month of February. So thank you for that comment or question.
Yeah, is anyone with a question?
So I do have a question.
Yep, for sure.
So thank you, Mr. Raymond. I wanted to—
That's Husoni. Sorry, that's not Mr. Raymond. Thank you for the formality, but you could just call me Husoni.
Okay, thank you, Husoni. I wanted to ask if you could give a bit of, I know you don't have a lot of time to go in depth, but I did want to ask if you could perhaps give a bit more of a background into the interdependencies of how systemic racism on different levels impacts the general Black experience in Canada. And what I mean is how systemic racism in multiple incidences across a person's lifespan, why that matters on impacting their financial situation, impacting their housing situation, impacting their education on a broader level.
Yeah, so that's a huge question, and I'll try my best to kind of answer it. So first of all, from a historical perspective, Black people have not been given the same access to opportunities and capital, and you know that definitely impacts you know or present socioeconomic status. I'll give an example, for instance. You know, there was over 200 years of enslavement, and when slavery was abolished, even what the British did was give money to the slave owners as compensation for loss of property, and what Black people got was nothing. So can you imagine being exploited for your labor for centuries, and then, you know, when slavery was finally abolished, the people who got compensated were the slave owners. And to this day, Black people still have gotten nothing for the free labor that they've contributed to Canada, contributed to the development of a lot of these first world countries are a result of the exploitation and free labor that they got for Black people. So I'm a strong advocate for reparations, and that's a conversation that we can get into later. And I also, this is just an interesting fact that the British government just finished paying off the loan that it took out to pay slave owners in, I believe, like the early 2000s or so. So we had, it's not that recently that taxpayer dollars in Britain were being used to pay off the loan that the British government took out to pay former slave owners for the loss of property. But even after enslavement, we still had long periods of segregation and discrimination. You know, when we look at Black communities in Canada, especially in Atlantic Canada, where I'm more familiar with the history, you know, even the Black loyalists, for instance, that came from America that were promised land and freedom in Canada, the land that they got, most of them didn't even get the land that they were promised. And the ones that did get land, it was the land that was not very profitable. It's land that they weren't able to really make a living off. And a lot of Black people actually ended up leaving because of that very same reason. So there's a history of lack of opportunities for Black people. So, you know, compared to for instance, white people, they're not poverty cannot necessarily be blamed on their race. And Black people were not able to own anything. And even after slavery was abolished and segregation, there were still barriers to us actually accessing capital. We were still barred from attending universities that I gave examples earlier around McGill and Queen's University. You know, getting loans, probably that was also impacted for housing. In the present day context now, you know, obviously in Canada, there is a racial income gap that people can look up. So Black children are more likely to be born in poverty. I was reading something the other day that Black women are more likely to die during childbirth. So I guess those are some systemic issues. From the day you are born, you're already at a disadvantage. You know, the schools in Black neighborhoods, you know, when there were segregated schools in Ontario and in Nova Scotia, you know, Black schools were not funded in the same way as predominantly white schools in more affluent neighborhoods. Even in the present day example, for instance, let's talk about, you know, Black people with a degree. There's data from Statistics Canada that shows that Black people with the same qualifications, the same university degrees, are often underemployed. So they're given jobs that don't meet their qualifications because of the stereotypes associated with Black people and the type of work that they're capable of doing. There was research that showed that Statistics Canada, that they sent out resumes with you know, the same qualifications but different names, and the resumes with the white sounding names were more likely to get a callback than resumes with Black sounding names. So from being more likely to be born in poverty to, even if you were able to overcome poverty and then access to post-secondary education, which I talk about the barriers that you'll face while being in university that might result in Black students just dropping out, you know, them feeling that they don't belong. Imagine the first week I'm on campus, I was told that I was a thug and they didn't expect me to sound this articulate. You know, and those microaggressions really have an impact. The things that you digest about yourself can also impact your self-esteem. You know, always seeing yourself represented in a certain way in the media, and overall, you know, the stereotypes associated with your race. It's hard not to internalize kind of those negative perspectives about yourselves. So you have to also be constantly fighting to break those stereotypes and overcome kind of internalizing it, because there's this theory called the self-fulfilling prophecy, where, you know, if you constantly hear something about yourself, if society consistently tells you this is who you are, you know, it's hard to kind of resist that. So the resistance that it takes to survive in kind of these colonial institutions, then even if you get that degree, right, you're less likely to get hired for a job that you're qualified for and get underpaid. You know, one of my mentors told me about a situation where she applied for a job and her name is Mary. So they obviously didn't know she was Black. And she went in for the interview. And when the interviewer saw her, he was like, "You're Mary?" And she said, "Yes." And suddenly the position was no longer available, but he had like an administrative role that he could interview her for. But he had an administrative role that he could interview her for. So again, you know, entering the workforce and the quality of work that you get access to, but also you mentioned healthcare. You know, one example is Black people are often undiagnosed for pain or given less pain medication. I remember having an experience where I got my wisdom teeth taken out and I was told that I should take less pain medication because I was Black, and I did some research and there was no research that could support that. But that's a stem or a result of, you know, how Black people were seen as being tolerant, and actually one of the main justifications for enslavement, that we could handle pain well. And that's still permeating the medical system. When we talk about not having, or you know, when you look at, for instance, skin rashes, it's all how it looks on white people. Like all of the diagnostic tools are basically tailored around white people. So doctors aren't even equipped to recognize certain diseases in Black people. When we talk about the justice system, you know, more likely to be pulled over by the police and having negative interactions with the police, getting a criminal record, and then that affecting your employability in the future. When we talk about housing, you know, first of all, having access to a loan, again, because more likely to be in poverty, less likely to get a job that pays you well. That also impacts home ownership. And even renting, you know, discrimination in that. I was reading an article last year where a woman in Toronto, again, had talked to a landlord, scheduled a viewing, and when he saw her, suddenly the apartment was no longer available. So those are just a few examples, but obviously it goes much deeper. That shows the barriers to success and equal opportunities to enjoy Canadian society and a quality of life that are impacted by systemic racism in various upper or institutions. And I see that my time is about to expire here because it's now 7:47 for me. So that sounds like almost an hour that I've been talking. The time is different for you, I'm sure. But I briefly wanted to, I guess I'll just give 3 tips on allyship for people who are looking to be more effective allies. And remembering that allyship is not, it's not a label, it's a constant thing, it's a journey. And it's not something that you can declare on yourself. It's something that is given to you by the people that you're looking to ally yourself with. And the first and most important thing that I'd say is a willingness to learn and educate yourself and others on, and I know this, you've probably heard this before, but I can't underscore how important it is. Because suddenly, you know, after I planned those Black History Month events, I became the only race expert on my campus. So everyone always constantly were asking me, can you explain this? Can you tell me this? Can you, oh, I didn't know this was the experience. Can you share more? And that's okay if you signed up for that labor. You know, I signed up to come here. I enjoy doing this, but a lot of Black people just want to live their lives and not constantly have to explain systems of oppression. And also race and racism are actually fields of study. You know, a lot of Black people experience racism and they can talk about their own experiences, but are not necessarily experts in the theory of race and racism to articulate effectively, you know, all how race and racism works. They just know I get treated differently, but not necessarily, you know, interrogating, you know, the systems and the history and how those intersect to cause kind of these issues. So the first thing, that would be my main thing, is educating yourself and not being a passive bystander. So being an ally that actually speaks up when you see injustice, because also it's tiring to always be the one to speak up about these issues. So listen, if you see a racialized person is uncomfortable, or if they express that, ask them, I will stand with you in this situation, or I don't think that's right. Because a lot of times, you know, racialized people are painted to be these angry people that are just looking for things to complain about. And that's because people don't understand what we're going through and what our experiences are. But 2, because no one else is talking up alongside us. And notice I didn't say talking up for us, but because it requires listening. And if you have a position of authority, being able to amplify that, or if you experience a situation where there are no racialized people and, you know, an obvious, for instance, I can't tell you the amount of times that I had people say to me, yeah, I went home for Thanksgiving and my uncle or my grandma or my mom said this racist thing. And I'm like, what did you do about it? And it was nothing, you know? And, you know, that was funny to me because no one's racist. everyone always says, yeah, racism is dead, there's no racism. But then I'd hear from these people about, you know, them telling me their own family were racist or said racist things. And then I just wonder, you know, your uncle could be the chief of police, your aunt, your racist aunt could be the head of HR, and how, you know, that impacts or contributes to systemic racism and racism in general. The last thing I wanted to talk about was listening to racialized people and trying to support them. But most importantly, recognizing kind of intent versus impact. So I can't tell you the amount of times that I've heard, you know, that was not my intention. That was not this person's intention. They didn't mean it that way. And, you know, it erases the impact that it had on me. So recognizing, as I said, that allyship is a journey, and sometimes people will make mistakes, but it's not about whether or not it was intended, but whether or not it had an impact on someone else, and recognizing the impact it had, and seeing how you can do better in the future, rather than make an excuse to say, oh, I just didn't intend for it to happen. Because even if you had the best of intentions, the impact that it had is still real. And I think I'll end it there. I'll entertain any final questions or thoughts, but I've been talking for an hour, so.
Yeah, thank you so much, Husoni. So now if we have any further questions, you can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat, please. So while we're waiting for a few questions, I have a question actually. So I keep hearing this notion that Black History Month is kind of divisive because we don't have Asian History Month, we don't have Indian History Month, because not only Black people in general are the one facing any inequalities or anything. So how do you respond to such notion that, you know, not only really Black History Month, it should be White History Month as well, or Indian History Month, or Asian?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I will note that there is a Asian History Month, but it's just not, I think it's just recently getting popularity. But I'd say that there is a need for Black History Month, based on what I said before, because Black history has been erased. It's the same logic as to why, you know, we don't say all lives matter, and it's imperative to say Black Lives Matters, because Black lives are the ones that often face state-sanctioned violence, and it's the same thing. It's our history that is being erased, and in order to combat that, having this dedicated time to speak about Black history is important. And, you know, every day is White History Month. As I mentioned, like the entire curriculum is white. It's all from a Eurocentric perspective. So we don't need a specific month to talk about white history, because it's so ingrained in all aspects of what we learn. So yes, that in brief, that would be my answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any further questions? Anyone with a question? I know Natalia have a question. Okay, sure, go ahead.
I was just, you know, thinking about what you said earlier about the erasure of Black authors and academics from academia, from, you know, the canon, the Western canon. I'm just wondering, like, your personal recommendations, maybe personal favorites that students could look more into.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I could send like a list of resources and stuff, but my recent favorite would be Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard. And it really, because of my interest in kind of the history of state-sanctioned violence against Black people in Canada, that would be my go-to recommendation. But there are a lot of other Black authors, you know, Desmond Cole wrote an award-winning book, The Skin We're In, that might also be really enlightening. And yeah, those would be my top two Canadian. my Canadian, I've been getting so many calls, my top 2 Canadian author recommendations, but yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna have to head out because I really need to return these calls. I'm participating in a kind of recruitment event that I'll be responsive to. But it was really a pleasure speaking with you both and kind of sharing my voice and experiences, and feel free to reach out to me with any follow-up questions at husoni@yourq.ca.
Well, thank you so much again for your time. Thank you so much for everything. And thank you for attending our event. Please, everyone, check out our social media for Black History Month news throughout the month. Thank you. Have a great day, Husoni.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Great. So I guess this wraps up our night, our event. And Natalia, do you have anything to say?
Just thank you for hosting this fantastic event, and thank you everyone for attending.